For centuries, vampires have haunted the human imagination, lurking in the shadows of folklore, literature, and cinema. But where did these creatures come from? Are they merely a product of storytelling, or do they stem from something more sinister, perhaps a reflection of deep-seated fears woven into the very fabric of history? Vampires, as we understand them today, are blood-drinking, immortal beings that thrive in darkness. They are often depicted as powerful yet cursed figures, either as monstrous entities or seductive aristocrats. But long before Dracula and modern vampire fiction, ancient civilizations had their own terrifying versions of these creatures. This script will take you on a chilling journey through the origins and evolution of vampire lore. We'll explore how early cultures feared and worshipped blood-drinking entities, how medieval superstitions fueled real-life vampire hunts, and how literature transformed these beings from grotesque monsters into charismatic anti-heroes. Along the way, we'll uncover scientific explanations behind vampire myths and delve into the eerie world of modern-day vampire subcultures. What is it about vampires that continue to captivate us? Are they reflections of our fears, of death, disease, or the unknown? Or do they represent something more profound? A dark allure that speaks to forbidden desires and the quest for immortality. By the end of this journey, we'll have unraveled the dark history of vampire lore, separating fact from fiction and myth from reality. But beware, vampire legends have endured for a reason, and sometimes the scariest stories are the ones rooted in truth. Now, let's step into the shadows and begin our exploration of one of history's most enduring and terrifying legends. Origins of vampire myths. The fear of blood-drinking creatures is not unique to any one culture. Long before the word vampire was ever spoken, ancient civilizations told stories of supernatural beings that preyed on the living. These early myths set the foundation for the vampires we know today. In Mesopotamian mythology, some of the earliest vampire-like beings appeared over 4,000 years ago. The Akkadian Ekimu and the Sumerian Utuku were restless spirits of the dead, unable to find peace. These beings were said to wander the earth, seeking the warmth of the living and sometimes draining their victims of energy or blood. Another terrifying creature was Lilitu, a female demon believed to seduce men and drink the blood of newborn children, an entity that would later influence legends of Lilith in Jewish folklore. The ancient Greeks had their own tales of vampiric beings. The Lamia was once a beautiful woman cursed by the gods to feast on the blood of children. Similarly, the Empusa was a shape-shifting demon that lured men into the night, draining their life force. These creatures embodied fear of the unknown, female seduction, and premature death. But the vampire myth wasn't confined to the West. In China, the Jiangshi, or hopping vampire, was believed to be a reanimated corpse that leaped after its victims, sucking their life essence. This belief in vampiric entities was widespread across cultures, each adapting the concept to their own fears and traditions. By the Middle Ages, vampire hysteria took hold across Europe, particularly in Slavic and Balkan regions. These cultures believed that improper burials, suicides, or those who died under mysterious circumstances could return as the undead. People took extreme measures to prevent this, staking bodies, beheading corpses, or even exhuming and burning suspected vampires. These early vampire myths, rooted in ancient fears of death and the afterlife, would evolve over time, growing more sophisticated and terrifying. But what truly fueled the belief in vampires? As we move forward in history, we will see how real-life events, diseases, and historical figures gave rise to the legendary creatures we know today. The evolution of vampire folklore. As medieval Europe descended into centuries of darkness, superstition and fear flourished. The vampire myth transformed from ancient spirits and demons into something far more terrifying: the idea that the dead could rise from their graves to feed on the living. During the Middle Ages, Christianity played a significant role in shaping vampire folklore. The Church reinforced the belief that those who died in sin or were excommunicated could return as the undead. It was thought that vampires could be warded off with crucifixes, holy water, and consecrated ground, reflecting the deep connection between religion and fear of the supernatural. But vampire hysteria didn't remain confined to folklore. Real-life vampire panics erupted throughout Eastern Europe, particularly in the Balkans. One of the most infamous cases was Peter Blagojevich, an 18th century Serbian farmer who reportedly died and returned from the grave to attack his family. His case was so widely believed that villagers exhumed his body and, upon seeing little decay, drove a wooden stake through his heart before setting him on fire. Another notorious figure linked to vampire lore is Vlad the Impaler, the 15th century ruler of Wallachia, modern-day Romania. Known for his brutal methods of impaling enemies on wooden stakes, Vlad Dracula became a historical inspiration for Bram Stoker's Dracula. Though there is no evidence he drank blood, his ruthless reputation cemented him as one of history's most feared rulers. Equally disturbing is the story of Countess Elizabeth Bathory, a Hungarian noblewoman from the 16th century who allegedly tortured and bathed in the blood of young women. While some believe these accusations were politically motivated, the legend of the Blood Countess only added to the growing fear of blood-drinking aristocrats. As these real-life horrors spread across Europe, vampire lore evolved. No longer were vampires just mindless ghouls. They became more intelligent, more cunning, and more seductive. This shift set the stage for the vampire's transformation in literature and cinema, a transformation that would soon turn the vampire into one of the most iconic creatures in horror history, the literary and cinematic transformation of vampires. By the 19th century, vampire myths had evolved from gruesome folklore into a refined yet terrifying presence in literature. No longer just mindless monsters, vampires became sophisticated, mysterious, and dangerously alluring. This transformation began with one of the earliest vampire stories in Western literature, John Polidori's The Vampire, 1819. Inspired by Lord Byron, Polidori's vampire, Lord Ruthven, was a charming aristocrat who preyed upon high society, marking the first time a vampire was depicted as something other than a mindless corpse. However, the defining work that immortalized the vampire in pop culture came decades later, Bram Stoker's Dracula, 1897. Count Dracula was no longer just a folkloric ghoul, but a complex character, intelligent, hypnotic, and terrifyingly immortal. Stoker's novel blended vampire legends with gothic horror, introducing many of the tropes we associate with vampires today: transformation into bats, the fear of sunlight, and the vampire hunter embodied in Professor Van Helsing. As literature shaped the vampire myth, cinema embraced it. One of the earliest vampire films, Nosferatu, 1922, introduced the grotesque Count Orlok, a rat-like creature who spread plague and death. But it was Bela Lugosi's Dracula, 1931, that cemented the vampire's status as a suave, charismatic villain. With his hypnotic gaze, thick accent, and flowing cape, Lugosi defined the image of Dracula for generations. Throughout the 20th century, vampires continued to evolve. Hammer horror films in the 1950s and 60s, starring Christopher Lee, made Dracula more violent and seductive. By the 1970s, Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire redefined the vampire as a tragic, philosophical figure, giving them a sense of depth and moral conflict. The 21st century saw vampires take on new forms in pop culture, from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which blended horror with coming-of-age themes, to Twilight, which romanticized vampires for a younger audience, and What We Do in the Shadows, which satirized the genre. Vampires have remained endlessly adaptable, but despite all these changes, the core elements of vampire lore remain the same. They are creatures of the night, cursed with immortality, and forever bound to the thirst for blood. Now, let's step beyond fiction and explore the science behind the vampire myth. The science behind the vampire myth. While vampire legends are steeped in folklore and fiction, many historians and scientists believe that real-world diseases and psychological conditions may have contributed to the myth. Over the centuries, certain medical conditions have exhibited symptoms eerily similar to those attributed to vampires, blurring the line between myth and reality. One of the most widely cited explanations is porphyria, a rare blood disorder that causes extreme sensitivity to sunlight, leading to blistered skin and facial disfigurement. In severe cases, gums recede, making teeth appear elongated, eerily similar to the classic vampire image. Some have speculated that people suffering from porphyria may have sought relief from symptoms by drinking blood, though there is little historical evidence to confirm this practice. Another contributing factor could be rabies, a disease that causes aggression, hypersexuality, sensitivity to light and water, and, in some cases, a desire to bite others. Outbreaks of rabies in Europe coincided with increased reports of vampire sightings, leading some historians to believe that rabies may have fueled vampire hysteria. Beyond medical conditions, premature burials and the natural process of decomposition played a significant role in vampire fears. In the past, people who fell into comas or suffered from catalepsy, a condition that causes temporary paralysis, were sometimes mistakenly declared dead and buried alive. When graves were later disturbed, villagers would find bodies that appeared to have moved, with blood on their lips, assumed to be evidence of vampirism rather than the natural breakdown of the body. Decomposition itself can be deceptive. As a corpse decays, the skin pulls back, making nails and hair appear to continue growing. The gases in the body can cause a bloated, almost reanimated appearance. And as internal organs break down, a dark fluid can leak from the mouth, creating the illusion that the corpse had been drinking blood. These scientific explanations provide logical reasons for why vampire hysteria spread, but despite our understanding of these phenomena today, the legend of the vampire refuses to die. In fact, in the modern world, some people not only believe in vampires, but claim to be vampires themselves. Next, let's explore the modern-day vampire subculture and the lasting impact of vampire lore on society. Modern-day vampirism and cultural impact. Even in today's world of science and technology, the vampire myth persists, not just in fiction, but in reality. Some people genuinely identify as vampires, believing they need to drink blood or feed off energy to survive. This phenomenon has given rise to a modern vampire subculture, where individuals adopt vampire-like lifestyles, complete with rituals, covens, and strict ethical guidelines regarding blood consumption. These self-proclaimed vampires, often found in underground communities across Europe and North America, distinguish themselves from the supernatural beings of legend. Some claim to be sanguinarians, who drink small amounts of human blood, often obtained consensually, while others identify as psychic vampires, believing they feed on the energy of others rather than physical blood. While these groups are often misunderstood, their existence highlights humanity's enduring fascination with vampires. Beyond subcultures, the image of the vampire continues to evolve in literature, film, and television. The vampire has become a powerful symbol, adapting to reflect society's deepest fears and desires. In early folklore, vampires represented death and disease, emerging from graves to spread illness among the living. In Gothic literature, they symbolized forbidden sexuality and temptation, with aristocratic figures like Count Dracula preying on the innocent. In the 20th and 21st centuries, vampires took on new meanings. They became metaphors for addiction, loneliness, and eternal youth, themes explored in films like The Hunger, 1983, and Let the Right One In, 2008. Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire portrayed vampires as tormented souls, grappling with guilt and the curse of immortality. Meanwhile, modern franchises like Twilight and True Blood reimagined vampires as romantic figures, appealing to new audiences while reshaping vampire mythology once again. But vampires are more than just entertainment. They reflect something deeper about human nature. They embody our fear of the unknown, our obsession with immortality, and our struggle with morality. Whether seen as monsters, tragic figures, or symbols of power, vampires remain one of the most enduring legends in human history. Why vampires will never die? From ancient blood-drinking demons to seductive immortals in pop culture, vampires have remained a constant presence in human storytelling. They have been feared, hunted, romanticized, and redefined, yet they never truly vanish. Unlike other mythical creatures, vampires evolve with the times, taking on new forms that reflect society's deepest anxieties and desires. So, why do vampires continue to captivate us? Perhaps it's because they force us to confront our greatest fears: death, disease, temptation, and the unknown. Or maybe it's because they represent something we secretly long for: eternal life, power, and freedom from moral constraints. Whatever the reason, one thing is certain: vampires are here to stay. They may exist in legend, in fiction, or even in the shadows of our own world. And as long as humans fear the darkness, the vampire will always lurk just beyond the edge of the light, waiting for the next chapter in their immortal story. The legend of the vampire will never die, and perhaps that's exactly how it should be.